Everybody, thank you for being here. I'm Chris Clark, President and CEO of the Queen Creek Chamber of Commerce. Today we are doing coffee and a mic. We're joined by Senator Hoffman. Thank you so much, Senator, for being here. Thank you for your time.
Of course, thanks for having me.
We'd like to thank SRP for making this possible. And let's get right into some of the questions. We're at a strange point in the session now. Days go by and nothing happens, and then something happens furiously, and then nothing happens. So, but we're nearing the end as you guys go into budget negotiations. So most of the legislation has already happened. Tell us, what do you think is the biggest success that came out of this session?
Well, I think there's a few. I mean, I will say that just to your point about the oddity of this portion of our legislative session. So the reality is that nothing good generally happens after the 100-day mark, right? And the 100-day mark was about April 12th this year. So right now we're kind of in damage control mode. Let's make sure that deals aren't getting cut. Let's make sure that the best possible budget that helps our district and helps the state move forward is what actually gets produced. But in terms of the best legislation or the signature legislation this session, look, we're in a unique situation. We have been for the last couple of years. It's a divided government, right? We have Katie Hobbs, a Democrat, as the governor, and then we have a Republican-controlled majority in the House and the Senate, an expanded majority from the prior session, which is unique, especially given the governor's attempt to kind of take over the legislature during the last election cycle. And so what that means is that the signature legislation doesn't really happen at the same scale that you would if you had a Republican governor, Republican majority, right? It means everything gets muted, everything gets toned and watered down because neither side generally is ultra happy with the outcome. But I will just highlight a couple of bills that I've got, one of which is a Senate concurrent resolution. So that means it's a ballot referral that will actually go to the voters should it pass out. Now it's still ready to pass out, and I expect it to go sometime in conjunction with the budget. But it's called Freedom to Move. And essentially what it says is that the government cannot tax or track your mileage that you drive in your vehicle, right? Freedom to move is a fundamental, not only human right, but also American liberty. It was, going back all the way to pre-founding of our country. And so I'm really looking forward to hopefully getting that across the finish line and letting voters have a say on that. The other piece of legislation that I ran that I think is incredibly important, and I'm kind of on this whirlwind tour to educate the public on, and that's the bill to break up Maricopa County into either smaller counties. I have two versions of the proposal. One would break up Maricopa County into multiple smaller counties, so it would add 3 new counties to the state of Arizona. And the other version of the proposal is to let the adjacent counties, so Gila County, Pinal County, Yavapai County, some of these, Yuma County actually even takes a small portion down with Gila Bend, right? And let them claw into Maricopa County and take those portions on as parts of their county, right? Now, why is that important? Well, today, Maricopa County represents 65% of the state's population, 70% of the state's voters. In 25 years, actually at less than current growth levels, we're going to be 85% of the state's population with 90% of the state's voters. It's simply an unsustainable model. And while this is it's kind of like Jim Collins talks about, it's a BHAG, right? It's a big, hairy, audacious goal. It is a goal that we should be looking at because, you can't have a state where 80% or 85% or 90% of the state's voters are all contained in one county. It just strips the outlying counties of their voice. And so we think that that's something worthwhile. It's moved out of committee. It's moved to the floor multiple times in the last few years. And we'll keep bringing that back until we have a governor who understands and is willing to help.
Well, those are two really important bills. The breaking up of Maricopa County, creating the 3 additional counties. I know some of the arguments against that have been that we'd have 3 new
governmental entities.
Right.
And so government gets bigger, ironically.
And Jefferson actually talked about that. Jefferson's, his philosophy was that the only appropriate time to literally expand government was to make government smaller and more responsive and reflective of the people that it represents. And so that version of the bill is done with Jefferson in mind.
Meaning that each county supervisor would represent a smaller number of people and presumably be more intimately involved with.
Correct. Right now, our Maricopa County supervisors, an office that gets very little public scrutiny, other than maybe on the election issue, right? They represent more people than our congressmen represent. They represent almost 1 million people each, and that number is growing significantly every single year. Obviously, thanks to places like Queen Creek, and then Buckeye, our kind of mirror on the West Valley. In the West Valley, Buckeye and Queen Creek are responsible for 25% of the state's growth, and a lot of that is happening still in Maricopa County.
The clawing it in then, the argument about that is, for example, if Queen Creek became entirely Pinal County, that Pinal County simply isn't set up. They're barely managing the growth with Santan Valley, Casa Grande, and Maricopa, which is a whole separate thing, but adding the growth of Queen Creek to that then could overwhelm their structure, and that they would have to retool, so to speak.
They would certainly have to adapt. All of the counties would have to adapt. But the reality is that's what self-governance is about, right? And I think, one of the things I hope we get to talk about today is the incorporation effort in Santan Valley. That fundamentally is the exact same thing, right? It's the people coming together and saying we'd like to govern ourselves in a slightly different way than we have now. And so, yeah, there would be adaptations, but I think that's eminently doable. As we've seen, Arizona didn't have 15 counties to begin with. We've added multiple counties. And so, in fact, I actually have a pre-founding, it's an 1895 original map of Arizona, and there's only 12 counties shown, right? So, I think
For all 12 of
yeah,
the people that were here.
I think we can absolutely do it.
Back to the freedom to move. This one is particularly interesting. So the taxation based on mileage is one method to try and spread out freeway funding, for example, based on how much you use it. Don't go on a freeway, don't have to pay for it. If you're a trucking company, you're going to pay more. We've had the same gas tax since the 1990s, early 90s, and of course, the highway user revenue funds often get swept for something else. The last couple of years they have not, which we appreciate, but for many years they were being swept to cover DPS, and so that was one. Electric vehicles coming online aren't paying a gas tax, but they're using the roads. So I get where you're coming from on the freedom to move. I certainly don't want to be tracked. I hate all of those kinds of things, but how do we pay for transportation?
Well, transportation is like public safety, like border security, right? There are some core functions, very foundational functions of government, transportation infrastructure being one of them, right? And so, I personally believe we should be allocating a larger share of our state budget every single year to the maintenance, maintenance and then capital improvements on our roads, so that the construction of new, lane miles and freeways and things like that, SR 24 being a perfect example. But I do think that it is antithetical to our principles as Americans for government, especially in this big surveillance state that we currently live in, to be monitoring where you go, when you go, how far you go. The downstream ramifications of that are incredibly tyrannical. And I don't believe it's in our best interest to go that route. I mean, look, there are other ways to fund, HERF for electric vehicles. Those are conversations that, frankly, nobody's willing to have at the Capitol because they're politically toxic, right? They're third rail issues for Republicans and they're unsexy issues for Democrats, right?
But the reality is, if you look in the one big beautiful bill right now to fund the federal transportation and highway user fund, they have, I think it's a $200, it's something about that. And I don't know actually what the latest iteration of it is. The last I saw it was about $200. That is an annual EV effectively, charge that you're going to pay when you pay your taxes, right? And so there are things that you could do like that. There are things that you could do with regards to your charging consumption at home, right? Where there could be a surcharge placed on that based on, when you're plugging in your vehicle, et cetera. But taxing or tracking you for the literal miles that you drive creates many, many problems. And I would hate to have like a Governor Newsom in charge of monitoring and taxing us for where we go.
Right. The ramifications are bad. We got to do something though. So we got to get those conversations moving down at both the State House and at the federal level. Because as you brought up, State Route 24, which I remind everybody is a parkway, not a freeway.
That's true.
It's a very lovely parkway. But you come to stops and the 2 lanes already are over capacity, let alone the number of people, as we already talked about, that are moving here. So, and you've been a big advocate for the 24, but the money keeps getting clawed back. And one thing that I point out is that each year inflation continues to rise. And so even the money we had set away for the I-10 widening had doubled, essentially. The cost had doubled compared to the money that we had set aside. So we're still saving for the widening of the 10. 24 is much the same way. You had 87 million that you had secured at one point. At the time, it probably would have covered the interchange at Ironwood. Now I think it covers half of the interchange at Ironwood, or perhaps even only a portion of the interchange at Ironwood. And it's still not actually ready to be delivered, right? So how do we get the money for the 24, and what is the outlook at this moment?
Well, the outlook in this budget is bleak. It's minimal, so I've allocated as much as I possibly could towards it this year. I'm encouraging other members to allocate towards it as well. I'm encouraging it to be a major state priority. Unfortunately, based on the way that the budget is going and based on who's in charge of the chambers, and I'm actually specifically speaking about the House chamber, they've instead chosen to prioritize $50 to $70 million for roads in Yuma County, near Gila Bend, or actually I guess it's technically Maricopa County, but it's near Gila Bend, which, as you know, gets I'm sure it gets the daily traffic that the 24 gets. And then they've also allocated significant tens of millions of dollars in funding for West Valley Road projects, surface street projects, which I'm sure the people going to the grocery store over there will appreciate that. I doubt the hundreds of thousands of people that live in Pinal County who are commuting into Maricopa County, and producing for our economy. I doubt they're going to appreciate that. But the reality is let's talk next steps. How are we going to secure the funding? Because that was kind of at the core of your question. So I'm actually going to take this issue on and create a task force. Under the Biden administration, Pinal County submitted multiple grant requests and proposals to the Federal Department of Transportation to claw down some of the transportation infrastructure funding that was passed during the Biden administration. So you remember there was a big, $1 trillion, whatever it was, transportation infrastructure package that came out. Well, Pinal County said, look, we're one of the fastest growing areas in the country. We have a major high-tech corridor off the 24 that we think can bring jobs and economic development and investment into the United States. And so they submitted those proposals to the Department of Transportation. And unfortunately, because of nasty partisan politics and because Pinal County is deep red, the Biden administration turned them down. And so this is something that now we have a new administration in the White House. The Trump administration is openly and actively talking about wanting to foster investment into the American economy and into states like Arizona. Arizona is a common sense, high growth, low tax state. And so they want to invest in places like that. And so I'm gonna be forming a task force to take trips back to DC. Sean Duffy, who is the transportation secretary, I've actually known his wife for about a decade. And so I look forward to working with the Trump administration and the Department of Transportation. And I actually had the opportunity to host Lee Zeldin. Now, the EPA doesn't play a huge role in this, but there is an environmental element of constructing freeways. And so I was fortunate enough to host a roundtable with 12 or so key Arizona business leaders and myself with Administrator Zeldin. And so between the three of them, between Administrator Zeldin, Secretary Duffy, and President Trump, and then, obviously my role as not only a state senator, but the national committeeman, a member of the Republican National Committee, I think we're going to be able to pull down some federal funding in the next couple of years to get some serious investment in the 24.
So we had that EPA discussion at one of our luncheons a few months back. And basically, for everybody who may not know that connection, we're in a non-attainment area, Maricopa County and Port Pinal County effectively. We aren't meeting the air quality guidelines. Now, ironically, they say if we took all of the cars off the road tomorrow, we still wouldn't meet the guidelines. Right. Because we are a valley.
Well, 4.5 million cars could disappear tonight, and a month from now, we're still in non-attainment, right? And it has nothing to do with the fact that Maricopa County or Arizonans are polluters. It has everything to do with the fact that, one, we are in a valley. Obviously, that creates an effect where things stay. But two, most of the pollutants that cause our non-attainment actually come from Mexico and California. They don't come from Arizona.
California blows in, gets caught up in the valley, and we're stuck. So taking the cars off the road is not an option. We still need goods, services, and jobs. However, keeping those cars, say, from idling unnecessarily, being stuck in long lines, things like that, would certainly help with the non-attainment, right?
Well, I mean, look, you have a massive trade-off. So everybody has the idle, the start-stop on new cars if you've purchased it. It's actually really, really bad for your car's engine, and it will cause your car to break down and to have to be replaced a lot sooner. And so there is a trade-off between we are currently not the cause of our own non-attainment, okay? The EPA's absolutely unmeetable standards is the primary cause. The second cause being the fact that the pollutants are blown in from California and Mexico. And so, I don't buy into the philosophy that we should force the people of Arizona to have to replace their vehicles more frequently. I mean, vehicles, I don't know if you guys have bought a car recently. Vehicles are pretty expensive these days, right? I remember when I bought my first car, and it was a Chevy Cavalier. This is 2000 or 2001. And I think we paid it was $20,000 or $19,000 for this car. You can't find that today, right? Your entry point cars are $30,000, $35,000. And it's just like what we talk about when it comes to housing, which I hope we get to later. We can't force the American people, due to regulatory burdens like this, to have to continuously pay more and more and more, especially when wages aren't tracking with the inflation, right? And so, there are things, I guess, that we could be doing, but I don't think we should be shifting that cost onto the people. So,
right, we just need to build the 24.
We do need to build the 24, yes. Yeah, there's a lot of idling on Ellsworth Road right now that we could get rid of.
Exactly.
Let's do it to save the environment.
We're saving the environment. And yes, every time I meet with the legislator, that is 24 Parkway needs to be finished, saving the environment.
Yeah. I love that you call it the 24 Parkway. I'm gonna steal that from you if you don't mind. Because seriously, I think that kind of reinforces the point. Guys, it's not a freeway yet.
Right. Everybody
give us the
done.
money to make it a freeway, then we can call it.
They all think it's done, and we should add on to the 303 over in Buckeye. And Buckeye doesn't need any more roads. We do.
Yeah. Plus, we're growing faster than Buckeye. Come on.
Well, exactly. So you touched on. We could keep going on transportation all day, but I know we have a schedule to keep. You touched on housing. Major major pet peeve and upsetting to the chamber, because Queen Creek has a wonderful general plan.
Yes.
The fact that we stick to that general plan, that we control how things look, where they go, how they come in, has contributed to this being just a great place to live. You can count on it. If you come to invest as a business owner, you know how things are going to develop, and that it's going to be a quality place for some time to come.
That's right.
But continually at the State House, there's an idea that keeps getting propagated and comes forward every single session for the last 3 sessions, that there should be no zoning. None. You should build what you want to build, wherever you want to build it, and life will be good. Housing prices will come down, and it will all be hunky-dory. If you live in an unfinished subdivision, they can build a 10-story apartment complex right there. Now, I get the zoning. Senator Peterson had made the case that zoning took 16 years on a project, and that is true. It did take 16 years, but it's not entirely true that it was the zoning itself that took that long, as much as market conditions and multiple other factors. But and interestingly, that argument has popped up now in Ohio, California, Florida. So whether you're gaining people or losing people, there's this idea that we should just do away with zoning, which is a local control issue, right? So if you want that apartment building or don't want that apartment building, right now you can go and talk to your town council,
right,
which you were a member of the Queen Creek Town Council at one point. And I think it gets to your Jeffersonian point earlier as well. But tell us about the zoning bills and how that is playing out in the legislature.
So I'm going to start with the counter argument, right? So this is the devil's advocate for the other side. So they'll say that local control isn't really a thing because cities, like school boards, like school districts, like most counties actually, they are not constitutionally authorized. Okay, they're political subdivisions of the state. I don't buy that in terms of this zoning argument, and I don't buy it for one specific reason, and that's that you can't have statewide zoning. Right, the state, I mean, this is the whole reason why we have states and we don't just have one big, country absent interior borders, right? Is because what happens in Maryland is very different than what happens in Southern California, which is very different than what happens in Miami versus Arizona, right? And then you got Alaska and Hawaii, they're like 2 totally separate things, okay? We have to have the ability for local residents, local citizens to have input and some control over the aesthetic, over the vibe and the culture of their town. Look, I'll be very straight, and I don't care that this is recorded. I don't want to live in Tucson, right? I don't want to live in Tucson for a very specific reason. I don't buy in to the culture that the local government and the people have chosen by way of their local elected officials. I don't want to be in that culture. I don't want to be in that environment. Same reason I wouldn't live in Phoenix. I don't want to be a part of that culture. I do want to live in Queen Creek because we've created an identity that's very much about our state and national heritage, an identity that's about being neighborly and actually being friendly and smiling and saying hello to people still. We've embraced a culture that is much more active. We've got our equestrian, element of the community, which creates an incredible kind of identity area. When I describe it, I was in DC up on Capitol Hill yesterday, talking about the One Big Beautiful Bill and transportation and some other things. And I kept getting asked, well, what part of Arizona are you from? And I say, I'm from this awesome cowboy suburb in the Phoenix area, right? It's like the furthest thing southwest in Maricopa County, and it's this cool little cowboy suburb. And I describe it, I go, we have the highest or second highest median income in the state, but yet about 20%, 25% of the properties in town, I don't know if this number actually tracks anymore, but about 20 to 25% of the properties in town all have horses on them. Like, that's a really cool thing, right? And we shouldn't have the state coming in and telling us that we have to have these little shanty villages of really low quality housing products that are forced into our town just because there is a media driven narrative about housing affordability, okay? Now, when I say that, I say media-driven narrative. Are home prices expensive? Yes, okay? It is very, very difficult, even compared to when I got my first home, I don't know, 15, 16 years ago, right? But Arizona, and Maricopa County specifically, actually is the fastest deflation environment for housing in the country right now. Most people don't realize that, and the political narrative is never going to let that seep in because it doesn't play to the special interests that are pushing these bills, right? And I'll just they call it the Starter Homes Act, and I'll just break it down. It's got three major components, okay? The first is that you by right get to put high density on anything that, and any parcel that's over 5 acres, okay? Now, they've contemplated expanding that to any parcel over 10 acres, but the original proposal was 5 acres. Doesn't matter whether it's 5 or 10, okay? So first is high density by right, meaning no one can tell you can't do it. The second proponent is no design standards, okay? So the only thing that can be included are life safety standards, but no design. So meaning no material requirements, no material quality requirements, okay? And then obviously no aesthetic requirements, okay? Then the third one is that you can't have an HOA, okay? So nobody really loves HOAs, but HOAs do, it's a private contractual relationship that does facilitate the upkeep of common areas and things like that. But so let's take all three of those, because any one of those three in isolation as a silo, we can probably reach some level of compromise on that does work, okay? If it's on the density side, okay, well, let's talk about what areas it can be located, what type of zoning, within the general plan that can be done in. Like, there are ways to do it. If we were talking, let's just take Queen Creek, for example. We've got all this property that's along the railroad tracks, okay? Well, if we were to say, okay, all right, we could get on board with higher density, but we only want it in this quarter-mile corridor on either side of the railroad tracks. Probably something that we could all find compromise on, okay? But saying it can go anywhere, that becomes a problem, okay? The design standards, okay, well, we could probably find compromise that you can't require, like the city of Phoenix does, clay pipes. So the city of Phoenix will force developers to use clay pipes. Why do they do that? Okay, that's a design standard. They do it because there is only one union-based company that produces clay pipes in Arizona. And so they're forcing them to pay higher union prices as a crony giveaway to the unions, okay? Well, we can all agree that shouldn't be, that's not the purpose of design standards, okay? So we could probably find some compromise on that one item. On the HOAs, we could probably find compromise on that one item. But when you stack them together, what you create is a crisis 20 to 30 years from now as these little pocket developments, on 10 acres at the density they're talking about, you could put 250 homes. Think
out
about
of
that.
cardboard.
Yeah. And so 25 years from now, you have this little 10-acre pocket right next to, pick a neighborhood, the Villages, okay? You've got this little pocket of homes that are deteriorating, falling apart with no internal controls on upkeep standards, repair of your home, common area maintenance. When you stack them together the way that special interest has, it creates a nightmare scenario for our communities 20 years from now.
Yeah, it's bad all the way around. But we're running out of time because I'd like to go even further into that. But talking about zoning then and permitting, where it does become problematic. So one of the things that we have coming at us over the next 10 years is energy. It's going to be just as important. Electricity is going to be just as important in the conversation as water. And just for example, SRP in the next 10 years has to double production. Regardless of how you feel about any one method of production, it's going to take everything. It's going to take renewables. It's going to take gas. It's going to take across the board, hopefully someday, small nuclear reactors that are clean. But getting those permits right now and getting that zoned, particularly in rural areas, has become problematic. Is that something that the state can look at, and how do we get that onto the radar going forward?
So I'm going to give you, I think, a different perspective than you may have thought I would give you. I actually don't think the permitting should be streamlined in rural Arizona, because these large-scale solar and wind farms that produce negligible and unreliable energy for our state are taking up vast swaths of state-owned land, okay? So they're leasing state trust land to do this. Now, the neighbors, the communities, are rightfully coming in and complaining about them to the Corporation Commission and doing everything they can to stymie and slow them down. I actually think that's their right. I think they should be doing that, okay? Because the reality is the majority of Arizona's land is controlled by the federal government. That's a problem. There have been 2 Supreme Court decisions that have told the federal government, give the western states back their land, because at statehood, we were all promised that we would get that land turned over to us. Federal government simply refuses to do it, okay? So we should not be taking our last bit of state land that we have and turning it into these giant unreliable solar and wind farms, okay? I do agree, energy is absolutely paramount in terms of future growth, not just from a literal growth standpoint, right? We are we're a recipient state for all the move outs from the West Coast, right? And the Midwest and places like that. So obviously we have to be able to provide reliable and affordable energy for our citizens, but then we have the business components, right? We have data centers, obviously are going to continue to be more and more important in a digital age. We have AI technology, which is going to consume massive, unimaginable levels of energy. And Arizona's going to want to be a player in that AI space. Whether or not we all agree with it and whether we think it's going to turn into like a Terminator Skynet scenario, okay? We still need to play in that space, because what we don't want is for Arizona to get left behind in that marketplace, right? So my philosophy, and this is one of the reasons why I'm supporting the challengers to our Corporation Commission candidates. We have David Marshall, who's in the State House of Representatives, and Ralph Heap, who's in the State House of Representatives, who are challenging the 2 incumbents, because the incumbents are taking an all-in approach and not focusing enough on expanding Palo Verde, on small modular nuclear, on ensuring that our coal plants are operational and we're keeping them operational, and ensuring that we're expanding natural gas to the greatest extent possible, right? We have to have reliable and affordable. It's not just affordable and it's not just reliable, we have to have both. And the reality is that APS, and I'm glad SRP sponsored this instead of APS, since I'm going to mention APS. APS, in their integrated resource plan that they put forward and was rubber stamped by the Corporation Commission, it's going to cost Arizona ratepayers, APS customers, over $42 billion over the next 15 years because of the incorporation of the unreliable, unaffordable green technologies, the solar and wind, the battery, energy that they're doing. TEP, same thing, down in Tucson, double-digit rate increases. Why? Because they're saying we're going to go renewables and we're going to go battery technology as our sources. They're unreliable, they're unsustainable, and they're unaffordable for ratepayers. And so I think we've got to be bringing down energy prices, or at least slowing their growth to the absolute greatest extent possible. Because what we now know, I mean, we've seen this over the course of many years, but unfortunately, like we saw just a couple of months ago, energy is a life or a death issue for a lot of Arizonans, especially seniors on fixed incomes. If we're not providing affordable utilities, it can cause a major issue, right? And if if companies are only doing the bare minimum to ensure that people's services stay on, that's also a major problem.
And being in an SRP area, I know most about SRP, and I know they do have programs to make sure the power stays on, but manufacturers such as CMC, Intel, tens of millions of dollars lost if there's even a fuzzy
Absolutely.
blip.
That's right.
Not a full-scale outage, just a fuzzy power blip can shut down the whole thing.
Well, and I'll tell you, the integrated resource plan that an independent analysis found that the integrated resource plan that I was talking about will lead for APS customers to California-style brownouts, right? And that is, as you're talking about, the economic impact of that, not just the life safety, which is, there is no cost that you can put on the life safety side, but on the economic side, you're talking hundreds of millions, potentially billions of dollars in disruption if that ever came to pass.
Right. Unfortunately, I think we are pretty much at your time limit. I know you're on a tight schedule because I'd like to go deeper into that subject, as well as the ones we didn't get to, the water bills.
I can
that
give you
passed.
I can give you one more question if you want. I do have another meeting, but I'm happy to give you one more question if you want.
Well, we'll take a couple from
Sure.
the audience,
That
but
works.
real quick, there were a couple of water bills
Yeah.
that passed. Anything in particular that you want to?
Yeah, so I'll just quickly hit on the water issue, and that's there are obviously competing priorities in the state of Arizona. You have the folks up in northwest Arizona, right? So Mojave County and places like that are kind of antithetical to Queen Creek's perspective on water, and so there's always a tug of war and a battle that goes on even within Republicans at the Capitol when it comes to water. But I will just tell you that the bills that have passed this year, the bills that the Republican majority continues to put forward, and I will give a lot of credit where credit is due, the bills that some of the special interest groups like the Home Builders Association are working on, ag to urban, things like that, those are really good policies that will provide Queen Creek and Pinal County a lot of opportunities when it comes to growth and being able to grow responsibly, while ensuring that we have a reliable water supply for not just the next 5 years, but for the next 20, 30, 50, 100, 200 years. So.
Yeah, the ag to urban giving us credit for taking agriculture out of production and building houses. We can support about 40 houses for 1 acre of cotton.
It is pretty amazing, actually, because of technological innovation and just how we've learned to better manage water. I mean, the fact that today we use less water as a state than we did in 1950, I mean, that says the world, because you go back to 1950, I doubt we even had 1 million people in the state.
It was a few 100,000.
And now we've got millions and millions, and we use less water today. It really is a testament to the work that Arizona does, and I think this is why in the Colorado negotiation, thankfully the Trump administration has elevated Arizona in that negotiation, and I think they need to continue to do so, because if you look at our water policies versus California's water policies, it's night and day. We've done it responsibly. We've allowed growth. We've allowed the massive growth that's occurred to happen while still maintaining water and preserving it for the future. California just dumps it into the ocean. So.
Well, again, thank you so much for your time. Any questions from the audience? Anything about the 24 Parkway?
Don't all jump at once.
We've covered
Come
a
on,
lot
this
of
is your guys'
We
chance.
have you on record about the 24 Parkway, just saying.
Oh, I'm fine being on that record.
Yeah, anybody that wants to challenge us can drive on out here on the 24, and we'll take a tour. But thank you again for your
very
time.
welcome.
We appreciate you being here, and of course, thank you to SRP for making it all
Thank you very
possible.
much. Oh, we have one, actually. We have one question.
Yeah, I was just curious from this session, anything of note for veterans? I noticed there's a lot of veterans in Arizona.
So the only thing of note that I would say was, I think it was a flawed stolen valor bill that was passed. You have no greater supporter of veterans than me. I didn't vote for that bill because it was done, I think, for two reasons. One, the foundation of why the bill was ran is antithetical to how policymaking should occur, and that's it was done as retribution for a fellow primary candidate in the person's race, in the bill sponsor's race. Okay, I don't think we should be running bills like that to try and create criminal repercussions for our primary opponents. Okay, and then the other reason was because there was a lot of free speech implications, right? My grandfather on my mom's side served in World War II, was stationed at Pearl Harbor after the attack, but was stationed at Pearl Harbor. Both of my grandfathers, my dad has a divorce situation, and so both of my grandfathers on my dad's side served in the armed forces. And so, this is something my family has a long line of service, and I thank them for that, and I thank all of our veterans. But we should be running legislation for the right reasons, and then we should care about how the policy language actually works in it, so that we don't have unintended consequences. So.
Very good. Well, thank you again.
Thanks,
We
Chris.
appreciate it.
Thanks.